Ethical Perspectives on the News is produced by the Interreligious Council of Lynn County, which is solely responsible for its content. The views and opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily reflect those of the staff and management of KCRG TV9.
Good morning. Welcome to Ethical Perspectives on the News. My name is Pete Welch, and I'm the moderator for this morning's show. One of the things we've heard about in the news lately is the symbols that were placed down in Knoxville, Iowa, and today we'd like to discuss the possibility of their legality or illegality and the applications thereof. First with us this morning is Jim Conklin, who is the president of the Iowa Conservative Union. Good morning, Jim.
Thank you, Pete.
Also with us this morning is Sara Riley, who's an attorney with the Tom Riley Law Firm here in town. Good morning, Sara.
Thank you. Pleased to be here. And
last and not least, we have Joe Stutler, who's an Army veteran and an activist here in Cedar Rapids. Good morning, Joe.
Thanks, Pete.
What's this thing in Knoxville all about? A cross and a silhouette of a soldier kneeling next to it. No big thing, right?
For me, it's a very big thing. This is an individual who has experiences that I frankly don't have. He's a veteran, and he was trying to honor one of his past veterans. We can get into other issues, but what happened down there should be considered to be a right for an individual who is trying to show his belief and his feelings for another individual. We can get into some more of the details as we go forward, but I think it's a beautiful thing, and I would stand up with him to try and continue that kind of behavior.
Joe, you're a veteran. What do you think on this?
Well, I'm of a few minds on this, Pete. The Freedom Rock site itself, it's a beautiful site. It's a beautiful rock. The painting on the rock, I don't remember the artist's name off the top of my head, but he's going around the state and painting various large boulders to honor veterans and show patriotism, which I applaud. Love that. The particular one in Knoxville, the land was donated by the VA to the city, so the city owns the land. They've turned it into a city park. The locals got together through AmVets and a few other veterans organizations and locals and built a foundation, had the boulder placed, had the gentleman come out and paint it, and among other things is the woman who designed the Iowa flag. I mean, it's just a beautiful rock. It's a beautiful site. But then they sited a flagpole. Wonderful. I'm all for the flag, having fought for it, and one will cover my coffin when I pass. But then, without the permission of the city, they attached to the flagpole a plywood cutout of a soldier kneeling with a rifle, kneeling in front of a cross. And that's where the problem came in, because it's a religious symbol in many people's mind, the cross, the Latin cross, as we're all familiar with, and no other symbols are allowed. And it's not a cemetery, and it's not a park honoring a specific veteran that died. In fact, the gentleman that made that silhouette and placed it there isn't from Knoxville, nor is the veteran that he's honoring. They're both from the Waterloo area, as I understand it. And so the complaint there is either we're allowing all religious symbols, or we should have none in our public square. I'm all for allowing the religious symbols. I grew up in a very Catholic town where we had the creches and the nativity scenes and like that, and I'm fine with that as long as you're also allowing the Stars of David and you're allowing other faiths and those of no faith to also have the equal time. So that's my concern as a veteran. If I were not a Christian veteran, that cross doesn't represent me. If I were a Jewish veteran, that does not represent me. If I was a humanist veteran, that does not represent me. So that, I believe, was the concern of the original complainant. So I'm of two minds on it.
Okay, Sara?
Well, I haven't actually gone to Knoxville and taken a look at I guess it's not a cardboard cutout, but a plywood cutout. I do think when I saw it, it looked pretty nice as far as from an artistic standpoint. Whether it's constitutional or not, I think it's going to depend upon who's your judge. As you know, Pete, practicing law, there are a lot of issues that are not black and white. There are some that are. This is not black and white. there's a lot of gray. And it's an unusual case because most of the cases that I've read have to do with the city either erecting, whether it's the Ten Commandments or whatever religious symbol that is erected, or consenting to the erection of a monument. Whereas this, as I understand it, the city didn't know about it, but once it was there, they kind of liked it. And so that does make it unusual. I wasn't able to find any case where on city land somebody just kind of put something up and now the city has to, you know, people in Knoxville, more people want it to stay than don't, but that's not the test of whether it's constitutional or not. And I think it really would depend on who is your judge. There's balancing tests.
And I have to oppose both of your views.
Well, it's not a view, it has to do with what the Constitution is.
Right.
I mean, I think it's beautiful, I really do. And when you talk
But when
about
you're
it
talking
being
about
just
the
please don't.
Constitution.
Well, yeah, the Constitution is something I studied in law school and undergrad. I
Okay,
do.
so I'm out class, but
Easy, just
this
allow each.
is a difference between exclusionary and a person's free access or free exercising of their beliefs. This gentleman very clearly said that this wasn't a religious symbol. The cross represented to him that it was his fallen comrade. Okay, at face value, this gentleman's beliefs are protected by the exercise.
Okay,
Okay,
now,
let me just, first of all,
Okay.
if this were in his front yard, and I actually started out saying it is not a black and white issue, and it
I
depends upon who the court is. So I have not personally taken a position. So when you say you're against me, that actually is not
I
correct. But
apologize.
it's okay. But when you talk about his personal beliefs, this is on city land, and that's where you get into trouble. And like I said, I thought it was rather attractive, and I understand he's saying it's not a religious symbol. And if you're in Normandy, if you've ever had the honor of being there, it is so beautiful to see all the crosses and the Stars of David, and it is beautiful. And I can understand somebody saying that is a soldier's grave. It's not a religious symbol. And I could see a court deciding, okay, we're going to side with that. I could also see a court saying, give me a break.
okay, Sarah, with the legal background that you've got, for the benefit of our viewers, can you give us the part of the Constitution and then how it applied to the federal government first, and then the later case that took it to be any public ownership, because that's a difference, because this is public land that
Right.
this was put on.
Right, it'd be the Establishment Clause in the Constitution, in the First Amendment, you're not to establish any religion. And people say, well, this isn't establishing it, but the question, if you are favoring a religion, and one would argue if they were arguing to have it removed, that this is favoring Christianity, because that clearly a cross is a symbol of Christianity.
But it is also a historical representation of soldiers in Arlington, and you mentioned
Actually, it's not in
Normandy.
Arlington.
Okay, so Normandy Beach. I've
Yes.
seen these pictures, and so this cross wasn't just invented by Christians. At one point, it was a horrible, torturous way to die. So this gentleman built what he believed to be a respectful way to honor a friend of his. And as I understand it, and again, we haven't gone down there, that community helped put it up, having the same beliefs. So I know we've been talking about the exclusion clause, but we need to take a look. Is this really a religious item? And I believe the Supreme Court decided a very narrow view of that. There was 3 tests, you know. Is there a religion behind what this gentleman did? I don't believe so. This gentleman did something to respect his fallen soldiers. Now, I'm not a soldier, but if I want to put a sign on public property where my child died on a car accident,
It would probably be taken away.
I agree, and that's their right to do that because it's government property. But the city council here is not making a judgment on whether it's a religious item or not. They're making a judgment on whether it was good for the community. It was put up. Nobody sponsored it. Nobody forced it. So now are we going to inflict our beliefs on this gentleman that it's a religious object and it has to come down?
Okay, but you can't say just because this gentleman claims it's not a religious symbol. It clearly is. That doesn't mean that it's going to be considered unconstitutional. And you seem to
I
be
agree.
blurring the lines between public and private. If this were on his own lawn, and let's say there was a zoning that you couldn't have signs, Cedar Rapids used to only allow political signs so many weeks before an election that
Which
was
was
held
found
to be,
unconstitutional.
Right, exactly. So if somebody tried to complain because this person had this on their yard and they were offended, of course, everybody here would say, no, that's freedom of speech, they have every right to it, and freedom of religion, you can't do it. The problem comes when you put something on city property or federal property. Now, will a court find, if it goes to that it was unconstitutional? That I don't know, because this is a little bit close call, because I do see it as being somewhat artistic. But there are court cases where there are similar things that well, one of them that Joe sent me had to do with a case in California. But
Lake Elsinore.
Right, but in that case, the city council was clear
Was
and
way
said,
over.
they said, we're doing this because we want to stand up for Christianity. So they made it clear that we think this is a Christian symbol.
And King, North Carolina, this same symbol, the soldier kneeling, and I'm sure you've seen him, Pete. I mean, you're a vet, so this is probably near and dear to you as well. You know, we both fought for that Constitution. So, you know, Sara studied it in law school. You studied it in law school. I've studied it not nearly as extensively, but you know, I've had the bullets coming at me defending it. So, you know, I think we have some understanding of what that means to us. That symbol, that silhouette of a soldier kneeling with his rifle in front of some object is not unique to this particular gentleman who happened to make this particular plywood cutout. It's a freely accessible silhouette that's all over the internet. You can find many, many copies of it in variations, including what I would personally prefer, what's known as a battlefield cross, you know, commonly referred to, and that's the rifle muzzle down, topped with a helmet, and flanked by empty boots. A very common symbol of a fallen soldier. Another variation on the theme is the soldier kneeling down with his rifle in front of an Arlington-style headstone. And I know that a lot of folks look at the pictures of the crosses row by row and think, wow, that's Arlington, the crosses are everywhere, where's the problem? That's not Arlington, that's Normandy, France. In Arlington and other U.S. military cemeteries, specifically at Arlington, but in others as well, there is a prescribed shape and design for the headstones. All roughly 400,000 of the headstones at Arlington are rectangular in shape with a rounded top. And this is from day one at Arlington back in 1864, 1865. So we've established that you can have a headstone shape that is the symbol for all fallen military, and on those headstones you may carve one of close to 60 different religious symbols, including the Latin cross, including the hammer of Thor. I'm not even sure what that is, but it's a faith. The atheist symbol, the humanist symbol. There's probably more than a dozen variations on the cross, depending on which sect. The UUs have one, Wiccans have them, Muslims have them, Jews. The newest one, as I understand it, is what they call a sandhill crane, the representation of a bird. That's fine as an engraving on that headstone. And I think in Knoxville, they would have had a very easy solution by saying, you know what, if we could change this one little piece to something that's not really art, but is a design, and I highly respect the gentleman's motivation behind why he did that. You know, having lost fellow service members, that means something to me, means something very powerful to me. But to represent all fallen soldiers, an Arlington-shaped cross makes perfect sense, or the battlefield cross, the muzzle, rifle muzzle down thing.
I've been to Arlington too many times for
Yes.
personal friends being buried. And you're right about the headstones there, but there are a number of national cemeteries, such as the Presidio in San Francisco, and Point Loma National in San Diego, and they are all virtually the same white crosses that you saw depicted here, the ones in Normandy and whatever. But if you went to those national cemeteries, either Presidio or San Diego, and attached to one personal cross a fallen soldier symbol, I can guarantee you that the groundskeepers would be there to rip that thing out of there, because it would be lack of conformity with all the other crosses there. So you could do nothing to make one stand out any more than any of the rest.
Are all of at those sites?
Presidio is all crosses.
All crosses. Are they still burying people there?
Yes.
And
I think it's very limited space in Presidio.
okay, so
Yeah.
so if a Jew wanted to be buried at Presidio, they would be forced to have their grave marked with a cross?
I don't know.
Okay,
there's a
'cause
lot
that-
of people that may
'cause-
want to bury me, Joe, but
No,
hopefully
no, I mean, you
it
brought
may
it
be
up, so I'm
no
asking
place so
because
nice.
that one does make me curious, because I think that were I Jewish, I would be offended to have, be required to have a cross as a headstone.
I'm sure they wouldn't. First of all, if that was a requirement, you would not.
There's
then
an
be buried there.
accommodation.
But I'm sure,
Sure.
just like you in Normandy, where the Star of David is there, you
Yes.
would also have the Star of David.
Mm-hmm.
It's just maybe nobody who is Jewish
Sure.
has been buried
Yeah.
at Presidio.
One
my
difference,
guess.
though, at a cemetery is that that individual marker represents that specific person. That is that person's grave, that person's marker. Knoxville, that park is not a cemetery. It was not the park was not set up to be a cemetery where this particular soldier is buried. This was an afterthought. Somebody came along and said, "Hey, I like this," and they used zip ties and zip tied a plywood thing to
Okay.
the flagpole. And so that to me is, all right, I'm fine with that if you're going to allow all other comers to have equal space, equal billing. But I see a problem with that too. How is that tiny little park going to hold all of the possible symbols that anybody might want to put up, especially if the city is going, okay, it's a free-for-all. Next thing you know, you're going to have the Church of Satan putting up a statue of Baphomet. I mean, is that really what that community wants?
Well, what do we do about the case if you're talking publicly owned lands, when you're driving down the highway next time and somebody died in the ditch and the family and relatives have got a little memorial sitting there on public land that's in the ditch?
And they allow them until maintenance comes along. I'm clearly not legalese here, but what happened to this city being able to communicate with their city council? And I know the 14th Amendment pushed down a lot of the right of access or the exclusionary clause, but why aren't we trying to stand up and to defend this person's beliefs that all he was doing was honoring it? And you know what? If they take it down as a city, I'm good with that. But we're arguing over whether this is a religious symbol or not, and we're trying to get into all the legalese. I want to get back into just the common sense. These people didn't do anything to be malicious, allegedly.
Granted.
And there are people that are taking offense to it. So if kneeling is now religious, if a cross is always religious, where is it going to stop? Are we going to do it with, and it sounds ridiculous, but I want to push the point. Telephone poles. I know they're functional. A building falls down in New York and 2 I-beams happen to fall in the form of a cross.
Yes.
So it's religious now, right? And
No,
it was.
actually, it's not, and it's on. It's in the museum. First of all,
And that one actually
first-
was allowed, because when the building fell, there was a couple of beams in the shape of
And
a
they do
cross.
allow other people to
And-
put their religious symbols up.
And that particular cross, that steel beam cross, was a religious symbol to many people who saw it, which is why it became an issue. It's why they wanted it. They didn't just say, oh, look, a lowercase t, which means absolutely nothing. Let's have this as a symbol. They said, this is a cross. This is a sign of our faith. This is a sign for our fallen. The cross throughout the past 2,000 years has been a symbol of death and rebirth in the Christian religion and in cultures that are or have been dominated by Christianity. We happen to be one of those cultures that has an awful lot of foundation in Christianity and in the trappings of Christianity, for lack of a better term. So the cross as a symbol of a grave marker has an implicit religious connotation. When you look at other cultures, their grave markers are very different because the cross is not the symbol of their death or rebirth. So a telephone pole is very utilitarian. It looks like that shape because from an engineering point of view, you're dangling a whole bunch of wires that have to be spaced so far apart, and many utility poles have multiple layers, so they look more like a Greek Orthodox cross or multiple layers. If you want to say, well, let's get rid of the letter T, which I've heard the argument, you can say, all right, well, that's interesting, but the letter T goes back to the Phoenician alphabet and predates even Judaism by about 7 centuries.
So
we're not getting rid of the letter T, we're not getting rid of telephone poles.
So get rid of the symbol. What's the result? So this town has to succumb to lawyers' interpretation, and they get rid of the symbol.
Okay,
they remove the artwork.
First of all,
okay, it's gone.
First of all,
what's next?
I happen to be somebody who takes a little bit of offense to the idea that a cross is not a symbol. I happen to be a practicing Catholic, and I believe that a cross is a clear symbol of Christ. Okay, so I don't think we should be arguing whether or not a cross is a religion. Do you not believe a cross?
The Supreme Court talked about religion.
Yes,
and that's in the First Amendment.
Yes.
This gentleman expressed his beliefs.
Not on his own land, sir.
He expressed his beliefs.
Well, the test, I believe.
Are you saying that you don't believe a cross is a religion?
The three-pronged lemon
there's a three-pronged
Yeah.
lemon test, but there's also one that was espoused by Sandra Day O'Connor. And the test there was if a government action is valid, if it creates a perception in the mind of a reasonable observer that the government was either endorsing or disproving of a religion. And I think that is a little bit easier to apply than the lemon three-prong test. And I think this is the one that the courts are following to this day. And I think, Sarah, you'd agree that it depends on your judge.
That's what I said at the outset. At the very beginning, I said that this is not a black and white issue. It is so gray. If I was hired by the city of Knoxville to defend it, I could find sufficient cases to make a cogent argument that this is, while it clearly has a religious symbol, I would never claim that the cross is not a religious symbol, and I do find it offensive to claim it's not. But I believe I could come up with more than enough arguments and case law, both in circuit courts, district courts, to support it. If I were the group that has written a letter opposing it, I could also come up with more than enough cases, and it would really come down to what the judge decided. And the one thing I think is really strange in this case, and like I said, and I did some research on this, and I couldn't find anything where you had somebody outside the community that came in and just put something up. And that is really odd. And when you talk about him honoring somebody, if he doesn't even live in the county, why didn't he go to his own county?
My
and if the guy
understanding
wasn't
is
there,
he
why
was
didn't
working with that local group. The local group that put the flagpole in, my understanding, he was working with them. Again, I'm not trying to be a lawyer. I am trying to stand up against 3 people and say this gentleman did nothing wrong. And underneath my understanding of the First Amendment, not only are they not supposed to create a religion, but they're not supposed to allow other people to terrorize the majority. I thought we were a representative group, and there's a minority that's speaking out here.
Okay, first of all, nobody has suggested that we do anything to this man, whoever he is. Nobody has suggested he should be arrested. Nobody has suggested he should be condemned. So nobody has said anything bad about him or that his motives were impure. But when you talk about protecting the minority, I grew up next to a Jewish family, most wonderful people in the world, the Ginsburgs. And growing up, we would sing Christmas songs at Erskine. And I used to think, is that really fair to them? And so even though I love Christmas songs, I don't think they should have, and today they don't.
And that
they do once they get into high school.
Government-sponsored thing.
Okay.
Right, but this is government property, so therefore it becomes government-sponsored.
And again, I honor the gentleman. His motives are pure. His actions, however, do put a religious symbol, clearly a religious symbol, to a reasonable person, and some will disagree. And folks in Knoxville have tried the disagreement. In fact, they have been coached by the, I believe it's the Liberty Institute, which is an organization that ostensibly fights for religious liberty, basically in order to try and push Christianity into the public sphere more. And I'm fine with them attempting to do that. That's their First Amendment right, and I support that. But they have been coached to say, this is not a cross, this is simply a grave marker, to try and get around that. And if you look, Liberty Institute is specifically aimed at dealing with legal religious issues. So they're even being disingenuous there. Nobody is seriously considering.
The supporting group for the anonymous person who wrote the letter is out of state, and they're doing the same things.
The supporting group is an organization that says, we believe in the separation of the church and state. And what they've said is, you can either allow all faiths or you should have no faiths. And I'm fine either way. Personally, I'm fine if you really want to clutter up that park with a statue of Satan and put Star of Davids and Wiccan symbols and all of those other things.
I'm sure the city will take action at that point. But until then, why are we why is it hypothetical?
Because do we want to go that far? Do we want to have to push that in the first place?
So we get rid of it, so we want to sanitize all
Personally, I'm not even saying sanitize. I'm not saying get rid of it. I'm saying change that one piece to honor all soldiers and remove the religious connotation.
The one thing I would point out to you is that if you haven't seen it lately, your telephone poles are going by the wayside. They're burying the communications.
Oh, he wasn't the
transmission lines and all of the other things.
He wasn't the one who thought that a telephone pole was a cross.
I brought it up.
That was not just.
No, you said two things that do this as a cross.
No, I did not say two things that do this as a cross.
This is a religious item.
This past week, we passed over the deadline from the people in Washington that made the demand, you will do something by such and such a date.
Yes.
Well, that's passed this last week.
Yes.
I think what's nice to see and for the public to know is there haven't been any lawsuits filed or anything. They're trying to work on compromise, and that's what our society needs to do, and think towards something that serves both interests and takes care of satisfying both the interest of the person that wants to honor and the interest of
maybe time
keeping
limits
separate between church and government sponsors. We're down to about a minute and a half. Any final comments, Joe?
Real quick thing, an update on that. I did speak with one of the attorneys at Americans United today. Called them up to ask them, what's the update? And the organization, by the way, is headed by a Christian reverend. So, a lot of people don't realize that. They said that they realize the deadline's passed. They see the city saying, we are looking at options. We are trying to solve the problem. We're not just sitting on our hands. So they're holding off to see how things proceed, and I honor them for that.
As I understand, the city is trying to sell a small part of the land. The problem is the VA, when they donated the land, made it specific that the city couldn't sell it unless they sold it back to another government agency. So they're trying to work with the VA to see if they can sell a small part of the land so that it's not actually government owned.
And that's trouble with the restrictive covenants.
Yep.
Final comment?
I just want this group to understand, first off, I do believe in the cross, and the audience. This, to me, needs more people stepping up and not talking just like legal lawyers or legalese. So what the community is doing, I think, is wonderful. They're having a discussion, and I hope they come to a resolution that allows both halves of that First Amendment.
Thank you very much. And thank you for joining us on Ethical Perspectives in the News. Each of you should take some time out there and make a contribution to our community today to make it better for us all and our children. Thank you.